Hi guys, in today's video I'm bringing you the next bullet point from the OCR A-level specification, which is as follows. Explain the causes and consequences of disequilibrium in a market. So, there are a number of keywords in this particular bullet point from the spec. First of all, it's explain. So really, again, as we've said in previous videos, explain really means not much more than just a sort of touch the surface, scratch the surface level of understanding of the concepts. Causes of disequilibrium, consequences of disequilibrium, and obviously key point is, well, what on earth does this notion of disequilibrium, what does that actually mean? So without further ado, ladies and gents, let's get right to it. You'll all be familiar by now in your studies of economics of the whole notion of market forces, demand and supply, clearing a market at the equilibrium point. So when demand equals supply, that is the point of equilibrium, as illustrated here at equilibrium price on this particular diagram. So what about disequilibrium? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? The whole notion of disequilibrium means that demand does not equal supply. And there are various scenarios under which this can take place. So let's just consider our standard, very straightforward and simple microeconomics demand and supply diagram, and I'll just point out one or two interesting points about this particular diagram. So we've already established D equals S, that's equilibrium. Well, obviously, therefore, at any other price, that will be a disequilibrium position. And I've highlighted two of those for you, P1, which is clearly above the equilibrium, and P2, which is below the equilibrium. Now, theory goes, or certainly classical theory, so those of you who are familiar with the difference between classical economics and Keynesian economics, you will know the difference, and therefore you will know that classical economists would argue that markets clear instantaneously. There's this sort of instantaneous adjustment that takes place. So how could that be? Well, if price is at P1, let's go for the price above the equilibrium, then that means clearly if you take your dashed line across at the price of P1, then on the demand curve, this is our level of demand, and on the supply curve, this is our level of supply. Clearly, in that case, supply is bigger than demand. Supply is greater than demand. Now, that is known, ladies and gentlemen, supply greater than demand, that means that we have a surplus of product. Now, if you think about this reasonably and rationally and put yourselves in the shoes of a businessman or woman, you will know, well, if I've got a surplus of goods, how on earth am I going to get rid of them? It certainly implies that the price is too great, and therefore price needs to fall in order to clear the market. And that is exactly the analysis we would be considering here. We would consider that prices would be bid, so it's a useful term to use there, the whole notion of prices being bid upwards or downwards. Prices will be bid downwards, like so. So moving down the supply curve, down the demand curve. So as supply contracts, moving in that direction, then demand is expanding, and that's rational, isn't it, and reasonable to assume, because as price gets cheaper, then the level of demand is going to expand until the point is reached at which the market clears once again at a price of EQ. So that's that whole notion of prices being bid downwards. Well, what about in the other scenario where price is below the equilibrium? Well, in that instance, we can clearly see again, there is supply on the supply curve, there is demand on the demand curve. So demand is clearly greater than supply, so that distance between the two, we would therefore consider to be a shortage. Now, what would happen in a shortage? So that indicates that at the price level of P2, too many people are able to afford it, the demand is too great, and in order to therefore in order to balance the demand with the supply, price has to be bid upwards. And indeed, that's what happens. So once again, our analysis is that we will move up the supply curve as price rises, because of course firms will be more willing to expand their production of output, whilst at the same time as price rises, demand will be contracting because of that inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded that you know so well. And so we end up once again moving to the equilibrium position where the market is cleared. And so in that instance, prices have once again been bid, but they've been bid in an upwards direction. I think it's important to stress here, ladies and gentlemen, the role of price as a signal. Remember when you're looking at, for example, the functions of a market economy, well, one of the functions of price is that it's a signal. It's a signal for production to either increase or decrease, and we can clearly see that with this whole notion of surplus and shortage. Okay, so now let's consider just a few causes, and I'm only going to sort of run briefly over these because these will call either for further videos, or perhaps I've already got further videos, in which case I'll put a little card up and you can have a little flick to it. I certainly have videos with regard to the classical economist, the instantaneous adjustment, and so I'll put a link in one of the little cards above. So, causes then of this disequilibrium. Well, remember of course in your OCR specification, you're asked to consider specific markets, commodities, housing, transport, and of course agricultural markets are also ripe for discussion. And certainly you will find that in your studies of agricultural markets, this whole notion of surplus and shortage arises quite a lot. And then we get into the whole notion of, well, let's have buffer stock schemes. Those of you who are looking at development economics, even in your year 2 micro, this whole notion of buffer stocks is very important to stabilise incomes of farmers, etc., etc. So where you have gluts and shortages of particular goods, then you're more likely to encounter this disequilibrium. There's also obviously the whole notion of maximum and minimum prices, and again maybe we'll come to that in separate videos. Minimum wage interferes with equilibrium. So these are interventions by governments, generally speaking, which are interfering with the balance of equilibrium and pushing it out of equilibrium. Now, some of that can be beneficial, but some of it can be harmful, as I'm sure you know. You may be familiar from your Year 2 studies, again, of rigidities within certain markets, particularly labour market theory, which is a very big theory in Year 2 micro, where we look at the whole notion of wages being sticky in a downwards direction. And so this sort of adjustment here, where wages rather than prices are supposed to adjust downwards, doesn't actually take place. I mean, who wants to take a pay cut after all? And I'm constantly, when I'm thinking about this, I'm constantly reminded of Keynes. It really shines a light on this, because JMK said that equilibrium can arise at any level of unemployment. So not just full employment, where the demand is equal to total supply, but any level. I think that's very revealing, and it says a lot also about the labour market, again, which we'll touch on another video. Anyway, ladies and gents, that's it for today, and I hope it's been useful. See you next time. If you've actually watched until the end of this video, thank you. If you are a subscriber, thank you. If you're not a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button and the notifications, and you'll be made aware of upcoming videos. I'm trying to get one out every day now, from now until the exam series, so going to be lots of content coming your way. If you don't follow me on other social media, such as Instagram or Twitter, then do have a look for me, G_economics. And I look forward to helping you through your exams this year. Bye for now.